bees have unlocked meat honey by LivingZoo. Indeed alive, that's for sure. I don't know, this sounds horrifying and horrific, so we're gonna look at this. Also, please consider liking and subscribing, I appreciate it. And yeah, I don't know what to expect here. I for real don't know what to expect here. It must be horrifying, because where are these fuckers able to use meat for honey? Like, turn meat into honey? Turn honey into meat? Whatever. We're going in.
Bees, bees, bees. They are just about one of the only winged insects in the animal kingdom that exists, can sting you, but that people actually tolerate, for the most part. And in fact, many of us love bees, as they're not only kind of adorable, but they're also just about one of the most important animals out there.
Careful, a woman's dog stepped on a bee. My dog stepped on a bee. But yeah, we're gonna look at this. I'm curious where this is gonna go.
When it comes to our own well-being. As long as you're not allergic, that is. And this is primarily because they pollinate over a third of the world's entire food crops, and their actions contribute to about $160 billion annually for global.
Yeah, it's like billions of bees get obliterated during the making of almonds and avocados. It's very interesting. Also, like, it's a double-edged sword, right? They can sting you, but also they're gonna die if they do so, right? Or like they can die when they do so. So like they don't do that if they're not actually feeling threatened. In comparison to wasps. Fuck them wasps. Nobody likes wasps. I want them dead. They're actually protected here, right? You cannot just obliterate wasps, unfortunately. But I would if I could. As long as nobody sees it, I would do it. But yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm allergic to bees. Don't step on them. Ask Ember Turd.
Global agriculture, and without them it's believed that many people would die, and civilization would take a good beating. So I would say that's a pretty good reason alone to love them. And like I said, it also helps that some of them actually look kind of cute. For a bug, that is. Which is probably best exemplified by the mascot of all bees, the bumblebee. A fuzzy little group of over 250 different species that in many cases bear a pretty cool pattern.
The fat little dude that apparently can't. The chunky little dude that apparently cannot. That is supposed to not fly, but can fly. Yeah, bumblebees are cute. Anybody remember? It's like a really old video, right? It's like really old. It's like super old, right? Where a woman was taking care of like a wingless bumblebee and like feeding the bumblebee, taking care of the bumblebee and stuff. That was adorable. That was really adorable. These guys are adorable. These guys can also sting, but they won't do it. Like, they just don't do it. All wasps and hornets just need to... Yeah. Actually, hornets are not even as bad as wasps. Hornets are actually really useful because they get rid of parasites that you wouldn't want anywhere. They even tell wasps to fuck off. Hornets are actually not even that horrible.
And is one of the most recognizable insects out there, even having their own animated movie dedicated to them. However, bumblebees have lied to you. In fact, all bees have lied. Because while most people believe that bees equal good and wholesome, that doesn't actually apply to all of them. After all, the word bee itself isn't just one large genus. It's any of the winged species that belong to the clade known as Anthophyla. And in total, this extends to over 20,000 known species, with just 2 of them being the ones responsible for pollinating over 80% of crops. So talk about carrying the team. And now, this isn't to say that the other 98% are just bad cookies, but a few of them kind of are. And there's actually a handful of bees out there that don't just follow their own rules, but are the exact opposite of what you'd expect from relatives of bumblebees, operating more like animals you'd expect to see in some sort of horror movie.
What is this? What is that? Is that a chunk of flesh? Well, that's pretty freaky.
And one of the most prominent examples of this has something to do with a type of bee that is responsible for a substance often referred to as meat honey. Yes, that is first name meat, last name honey. But before I can dive into that, I need to first introduce you to its creator, the vulture bees. in remote parts of South America.
Of course, I'm not surprised that they're. Yeah, they're not European. I'm not surprised, huh? The vulture bee, that's crazy. You, yeah. I'm curious how it tastes though, or if it's even edible to begin with. Do good is my video in the list. It should be. It should be. I think it should be.
Within rainforests and jungles, you will find this group, a small band of 3 very closely related species of bees that all belong to the genus known as Trigona, with the species specifically being Trigona crassipes, Necrophagia, and Hypogea. And on the surface, these 3 species are pretty standard Trigona bees, being quite small, between 8 and 22 millimeters long, brown in color, and thankfully stingless. And you'll mostly find them in the same kind of environments as their relatives too, which is to say, areas that are warmer, dark, and moist. And in their case, this usually is tree hollows, abandoned termite nests, or even underground, where they set up hives with similar hierarchical structures to that of normal bees, with there being a queen, worker, drone, and finally the larva. But past this point, the similarities abruptly end, and things start getting a bit more unsettling, especially once it becomes time for supper in their hives.
Yeah, nah, bro. I'm not. Nope. Never mind. Bro, that looks gross. That looks disgusting. That looks like something out of Resident Evil. Stingless. Then they are friends. Are you sure that they are? Are you sure that they are? Does this look friendly to you? My favorite bee species is a killer bee. The bee of the anime character. Anyways, look at this. Yeah, nah, that's straight out of the Resident Evil. That's like that's horrifying. Nah, bro. Imagine you open up like I think this looks like a bin. Right? Imagine you like one morning you go out, you open the bin and you just see like whatever this is.
Now, most Trigona bees are rather ordinary, feasting on pollen and nectar from over 500 different plant species, just like many other bees do. So pretty standard. But these 3 species, on the other hand, they have no interest in the usual goods. And if you took a good look at one of the species names, the Necrophagia, you may already have an idea of what they prefer to chow down on, and that would be flesh. Yes, meat-eating bees is a real thing, and has actually been a thing for longer than scientists first thought, as despite being aware of these 3 species' existence for hundreds of years, it was only in the 1980s that the researchers realized that these bees were gobbling up meat, not plant matter. Although, we aren't talking about just any kind of meat. No, this meat would be rotting flesh. Yummy. And this is also why they're commonly nicknamed the vulture.
So, what's the difference between a fly and that thing? Killer bees are awesome because they are escaped genetically modified bees. They're also really aggressive as far as I'm aware. So, not too fun, but their honey's supposed to be good. But, yeah. Wonderful. Great.
Bees. So basically, if you put a fresh sirloin in front of one of these guys, you're gonna get a no thank you. But a decaying corpse? Then it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. An observation on these bees find that often how they like to chow down is by tunneling straight through the carcass's eyes, giving them behind-the-scenes access to Meatopia. Additionally, like many flies, vulture bees accomplish the feat of actually ingesting the rotting flesh by vomiting up saliva that is chock full of specialized digestive enzymes, which then help break down the decomposing flesh into a delicious homemade soup that can be then.
Then they're almost exactly. Wait, aren't they just like fly? They're exact. Huh. Maybe a result of convergent evolution with flies? Because don't flies actually spit on you? If like, right? When you feel like they bite you, but they actually don't, they spit on you and then use their mouth thingy to do that. So like, don't flies do the exact same thing? Right? They spit on something so they can like it dissolves so they can slurp it up.
Slurp down. And in many cases, the feeding process only gets more nauseating from here on out, if that's even possible. As if the vulture bee in question is a forager, they don't just let this masticated goop hit their stomachs quite yet, as after all, it'd be quite rude not to share it with their friends and family, which technically all their friends are family, but you get the point. So what these bees instead do is store this meat slime within their crops, which is the simple name for a thin-walled portion of their alimentary tract, where the goop can then comfortably sit without being further digested. After that, the goods are then transported back to their hives, where they then invoke their professional-level vomiting skills, by regurgitating not saliva this time, but instead the mashed up meat goo, which is then neatly stored into various pots embedded within the hive. And so by now, you should probably be feeling a bit queasy. And if you aren't, don't worry, because the vulture bees still have a few more tricks up their sleeves, or rather wings. You see, once this concoction is safely within their storage pots, it will sit there to age, and then over time be consumed by the other bees in the hive, specifically the worker bees who eat it straight.
So, they're essentially mama birding the other bees? Hawktua, spit on that meat. That does not actually not make it better. That actually makes it worse. The bees were specifically modified to make them super good at making honey. Unfortunately, this also made them super. It's like hyper aggressive, hence the name. But this does make killer bee honey very good. What the deal with the list you mentioned earlier? Just like videos that I react to.
And they rely on their highly acidic guts to break down the rotten meat. And fun fact, this acid is actually about 35% stronger than the stomach acid found in strictly vegetarian bees, which makes a lot of sense, as there really has to be, in order to prevent the rotten flesh from killing the bee outright from food poisoning. And funny enough, just like their namesake, the reason why its stomach is acidic is similar to that of vultures and hyenas, with the vulture bees possessing specific bacteria in their stomachs which have strong acid production capabilities. And while these guys are feasting, it seems that they're kind of messy eaters, as some of this bacteria is then also transmitted to the storage pots overall, which is thought to be actually helpful, as it serves to help the food goop from spoiling over time and poisoning the entire colony. So clearly, this acid is useful, and its breaking down the rotten concoction inside their stomachs is also the first step into making the star of the show. And that would be, of course, the vulture bee's infamous meat honey, as after it's been partially digested, the workers will then internally, meaning inside their bodies, store this newly digested form inside their hypopharyngeal glands, where they then brew.
Remember, honey is just bee poop. So if you ever ate honey, you are eating bee poop. A lot of people, for some odd reason, don't know this, but it's bee poop. You're literally eating shit. Moving on.
This stew into yet another new type of dish, which in normal bees would be their honey. However, given that this brew has used rotten skin, eyeballs, flesh, guts, and organs instead of plant material, what ends up being regurgitated at the final stage is not the honey as we imagine it, but rather again the substance known as meat honey. And shocker, contrary to what the name would have you believe, this stuff isn't really honey. And telling it apart from real honey is, perhaps not surprisingly, quite easy, as almost everything about it is different. For starters, meat honey is much thicker than regular honey, starting off as being completely paste-like, but slowly becoming a viscous fluid over time as it ages and matures. Well, then the color is typically a translucent white, lacking those beautiful shades of amber, gold, and brown that we are so used to.
It's become horrible.
Although I should warn you that in some cases the batch can take on certain shades of yellow, so if someone was hard of sight, and probably smell, then they might confuse it. Yet, even then, if they got some of this stuff in their mouths, like even an infinitesimally small drop, they'd know straight away this wasn't the good old Winnie the Pooh stuff, as the very few people who questionably have tried this stuff have described the flavor as being extremely intense, salty, but at the same time weirdly sweet.
Smoky, salty, uniquely sweet. That is very interesting. It's BXRM, but as it is processed very differently, I don't think it can be classified as feces. Technically not, but like, you're right. It is salty. Smoky and salty. Does it have any side effects though? Again, don't eat though. Okay. Found the day before sketching this article goes even further than I'm interviewing. Site PhD student B neurologist from Australia's blog stating that actually no one has eaten vulture bee royal jelly and it would most likely be harmful to humans. Don't eat. So we don't know, right? But here it says that no one has tried it before. So how do we know that it's intense, smoky, salty, or uniquely sweet? How?
Emphasis on the weird part. And then on top of all of that, very, very smoky. And while smoky, salty, and sweet don't necessarily sound that bad, in this case, they don't pair that well, with many of the testers stating that meat honey is not for the faint-hearted. And why these bees chose meat honey over regular honey may be quite the questionable decision to some, but ultimately it's a vital part of their survival, as this substance is highly calorically dense and rich in protein, and is the main way that colonies feed themselves, with virtually all the larvae being raised upon it. What's pretty interesting is that, while its main purpose is food, the vulture bees do like to spice things up from time to time. As in some of the vulture bees, such as Trigona hypogaea, there are reported cases where occasionally, colonies will actually use plant material, such as sweet products, to give a more unique profile to the meat honey, mixing it in with the rest of the batter, so to speak. And strangely, when this happens, they also tend to let the mixture mature for a longer period than normal, which supposedly helps to contribute to an overall more sweet tasting and deep profile. So clearly these guys are truly nature's gourmet chefs, even if they probably wouldn't.
So they like to experiment with food. Not experiment like the Japanese lady, but experiment with food. Very interesting. Very interesting. They are chefs out here. They're cooking.
Win any Michelin stars with me. However, like even the best of chefs, and certainly like me, these bees sometimes get tired of all the effort it takes to make their food, and occasionally are known to opt for quicker ways to obtain sustenance. And one of these ways is another first for bee kind, and not in a good way, as vulture bees, and many other members of Trigona for that matter, are capable of predatory behaviors, something not seen in any other kind of bee. And over the years, researchers have caught these guys preying upon the eggs of frogs. And I don't know about you, but for some reason the idea that
Good. Very good. Away with them. I don't like frogs. Goodbye. Goodbye. Get eaten.
bees are the boogeyman to frogs isn't exactly something I'd imagine, but then I guess neither was meat honey. And yet, here we are. And they dispose of these eggs with the same tool they use to consume their goop, which is a pair of remarkably sharp and durable mandibles that can slice and chew simultaneously, and are composed of something called chitin, aka hardened chains of sugar and protein. Now yes, every bee has mandibles, but the vulture bee is unique in that theirs are relatively sharper and more durable than those seen in most other species, and thus, while they are stingless, they are much more capable of inflicting a painful and damaging bite. And therefore, you wouldn't necessarily have to see this bee to know that it wasn't one of the normies, so to speak. You definitely feel it instead. But whatever the case, their decision to toss the vegetarian diet out the window and dive face first into the realm of the meat eater has seemed to pay off for them massively, as of all the vulture bee species known of currently, not a single one is considered endangered, despite facing the same risk that many other animals and bees have, given that humans do live in its general vicinity, with habitat loss, controlled fires, and pollution all being real threats. And yet, they seem to be doing just fine, with each colony sometimes also having a population of up to 100,000 strong. So it definitely appears that their gamble with questionable culinary choices has ended up paying off. But
Right. So if you make a mistake, they'll just fucking eat you.
this all then begs the question as to why did these bees even need to forsake their usual grub in the first place? Well, some researchers believe that it simply comes down to its environment, as one study that analyzed the local habitats of vulture bees found that they often lived in forested areas, where protein sources from plants were surprisingly rare, and thus this might have forced these guys for many generations to drop their stingers, bulk up their jaws, and make the leap to meat, or rather, fly to meat. And the even more interesting idea speculates that it actually might have come down to that acid-producing bacteria in their guts. Now, to understand this, you have to understand that it's been known that the microbiome of an animal can actually influence their evolution, and therefore the idea is that here, they acquired this bacteria in higher volumes, which thus allowed them to then eat something which they normally could not, and ultimately slowly pushing the evolutionary needle just enough that they eventually became what we know them as today. However, I will mention this hypothesis is not as strongly supported, so take it with a grain of salt, or a grain of meat honey. And actually, it's not just their bacteria, mandibles, and lack of stinger that has been a result of their diet, but also their fuzziness, or rather, lack thereof. As it turns out that being fuzzy isn't that efficient for a meat eater's life.
Yeah, I'm kinda not surprised, honestly, that they aren't as fuzzy. Yeah, I'm not shocked. I mean, but then again, tarantulas are fuzzy, even though they're also insects. So I guess I just ate truffle pizza and it tastes like truffle. It's good. Yeah, that's what a truffle pizza should taste like. Surprise. Interesting.
Or at least in the case of the vulture bees. You see, many bees are fuzzy not to be cute, shocker, I know, but rather because it helps them collect thousands of pollen grains, acting a bit like a velcro to which the pollen can attach to. But of course, since vulture bees don't really rely on pollen, being fuzzy is therefore not that useful, and perhaps maybe actively problematic if you're always being covered in blood and whatever other goop you might find inside a rotting body. And therefore, instead of spending the energy on developing fuzziness, it can be spent elsewhere, and thus explaining why they're always so clean-shaven. So yeah, truly an enigma among bee kind. And I hope their resilience to humans continues throughout the years, because
So they're bald. They're bald bees.
While I can't say I want to try meat honey personally, I do think the idea of them existing is pretty dang cool, in a weird, horror movie-esque kind of way. Anyways,
Yeah, anyways, in other words, there are bees out there that like meat and enjoy meat, and they straight up look like something out of Resident Evil. I'm not too excited. I'm happy they're in South America and nowhere near me. We already have to deal enough with wasps. I'm happy the way things are, and yeah, don't eat their honey apparently, because it's probably harmful. But they literally state that like could not find any record of like anybody ever eating it, but then there being a description of what it was supposed to taste like, and yeah, apparently smoky, uniquely sweet, and how do I say it? Meat honey. Okay, it is essentially meat honey. Wonderful and intense. Great.